Is that a good one? Wow. If you have trouble next week deciding what to sing, you're welcome to sing that one again. You know, I called out Cooter. He doesn't like me to do that, but I did it anyway. And I thanked him for cleaning our church this week, like he did last week, and the week before that, 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 the week before that. Thank you for that. Thank you for your service to our church. You don't have to cry today. I'll cry for you, Cooter. And I want to say to the folks that sing, I thank them for their hard work. They're here late on Wednesday nights. They're here every other Monday night. They work hard. We are blessed because of it, are we not? This is a shameless announcement. I'm just going to go ahead and say it. So we have 6 kids in our church that are represented by the families that are up here singing. If you're looking for a ministry opportunity, they stay on Wednesday night late on Wednesday nights and practice, sometimes till almost 10 o'clock. And if nobody else is here, I'm glad to do it. I get to play hide and go seek with those kids every Wednesday night. If you're looking for a ministry opportunity, you want to serve our church, you can serve our music ministry by serving those kids. I'm just throwing it out there. I'm just saying. Don't you appreciate our good music? Does it make your head shake? It makes my head shake. Thank you so much for that. I thank you, Hope, for leading that every week. If you have your Bibles, we're in Exodus. By the way, we're 10% of the way through Exodus. Just to keep you up, just a status check. 10% done. We'll be done with more than that when we get done today. Another 2.5%, I guess. Chapter 5. You will remember that all the stars were lined up now for Brother Moses. He had a new calling with a sense of purpose on his life after the experience at the burning bush. Did you move that bush up here, or did we just not move back up? There's the burning bush. It still looks pretty good, doesn't it? Looks like it was not consumed. It burned, but it was not consumed. Moses, with that image, burned in his mind. It would never go away. He has a brand new sense of purpose and calling. He has a mountaintop experience with God, literally on the top of the mountain. Have you ever had one of those mountaintop experiences in your life when you took off and you went to church camp or discipleship retreat or revival service? This one came complete with 3 miracles under his belt. The burning bush, the staff in your hand, throw it on the ground, it becomes a snake. Grab it back, and it becomes a staff. Put your hand in your cloak, it comes out with leprosy. You put your hand back in your cloak, pull it out, and it's as good as new. He's got these 3 miracles that he's able to tell and retell as often as he needs to tell them. He has a wonderful reunion with his brother Aaron out there near the campsite of God. God's been speaking to Aaron just like he was Moses. Aaron came to meet him. They had a wonderful reunion. They had a camping trip on their way from Midian back to Egypt. And there was only that one little bump in the road at the campsite. And that was with his wife Zipporah concerning their son Gershom's circumcision. That'll mess up a camping trip. And then he had this inspirational pep rally with the leaders back in Egypt. When he got to Egypt, he assembled all the elders together. He and Aaron told them what God was doing in their lives. And remember in verse 10 of chapter 3, God had told Moses, "Therefore go. I'm sending you to Pharaoh so that you may lead my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." Boy, that was clear. He had clear directions in his life. He was clicking on all cylinders. A world-changing event was just about to happen. There was only one thing that stood in their way. Actually, it was one person. Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. And that brings us to where we're at in chapter 5 of Exodus. Today, chapter 5 gives us 3 very distinct scenes in this unfolding drama. Moses had prepared his speech, and he was armed with his 2 signs, the cloak and the snake that he was able to show Pharaoh. And the first scene then occurs in chapter 5 in the palace of King Pharaoh of Egypt, sitting comfortably on his throne in his conference room. I'd heard rumors about this Moses fellow, my predecessor's adopted grandson. He was a Hebrew boy, this Moses. Sounds like he had it all going for him in his life. The world at his fingertips. And then I've heard rumors that this Moses fellow went out and killed an Egyptian and had to leave town because my predecessor, Pharaoh, was after him. He was a fugitive from justice. So he comes back to town these many years later and he wants to talk to me. I was more than glad to meet with him. Enter! I was just a little bit stunned. These were old guys. Had to have been at least 80. Moses and his sidekick had to be his brother. Looked just like him. What's your business? Sir, say it! And the other fellow, his brother, I guess it was, said, well, sir, our God, the Hebrew God, his name is Yahweh, and he told us to tell you, let my people go so they may hold a festival for me in the wilderness. This was going to be fun. Now, what did you say your God's name was? Yahoo? Yahweh, sir, the brother said. Let me get out my approved list of gods and see if this Yahweh happens to be on my approved list of gods. Who is this Yahweh that I should obey him by letting Israel go? Nope. Can't find him on my list. Sorry, no Yahoo or Yahweh or whatever his name is. He's not on my list. Don't know anything about him. And besides, no. I will not let your people go. The old man was relentless. But the God of Hebrews has met with us, he said. We're asking you to please let us go on a 3-day trip into the wilderness so we can sacrifice to Yahweh our God, or else he might strike us down with plague or sword. Strike you with a sword, huh? Sounds like a pretty angry God to me. The God of the Hebrews, huh? Your own special God? No. So Moses, you show back up in town and start trying to get the people to stop doing their work? Is that what you've come back to town for, Moses? Get to work. Look how numerous you people are. Do you realize what a huge percentage of my workforce that you people represent? And you're trying to stop them from working. Get out! Oh, and another thing, you can expect new work quotas coming very shortly since you have so much spare time on your hands. I was just about to show Moses and his Hebrew people and their Yahweh God exactly who was in charge around here. The Hebrews had extra time on their hands, and I was about to occupy it. Bring me the overseers and the foremen of these people. I want you to stop continuing to supply them raw materials. Stop supplying the straw for making bricks as you've done before. They must go out and gather straw for themselves to make the bricks. But I want you to require the same quota of them every day as before. Do not reduce their quota because they're slackers. That's what they are. That's why they're crying out to God, let us go out and sacrifice to God. Impose heavier work on the men. Then they'll be occupied with their work and they won't have time to pay attention to these deceptive words. And with that, scene one is done. Pharaoh is done. Moses had just finished the first of many encounters with the very stubborn Pharaoh. And Moses came up on the short end, and the Hebrews were about to feel the effect of that stubbornness. I've titled the message today for Exodus chapter 5, Facing the Impossible. Have you found yourself in an impossible situation? A situation in which you were not in control? You were trying, perhaps, to do the right thing. maybe you even felt like the Lord had directed you to do something, or confront someone in authority, or stand up for injustice, or take on a cause, or present a project to your boss, or to the country, or to the government, and get shot down, told no, cease and desist. Unfortunately, it gets worse for the children of Israel in Egypt. So we come to scene 2. Scene 2 has these foremen. Now these foremen were Israelites, Hebrews, Jewish people who Egypt had said, you're in charge, and you're in charge, and you're in charge. And these foremen, these Hebrew foremen, now had the impossible task of taking orders from Egypt and causing their own people to obey the orders. These foremen were stuck in a difficult situation between their own people and Pharaoh, who was giving them orders. That was scene 2. That is scene 2. We couldn't have imagined what was about to happen to us. The overseers came to us and they gave us Pharaoh's orders. This was impossible. There is no way that we can keep these new demands from Pharaoh. And then the overseers took us out to the people and forced us to tell our people, the Hebrews, what these new demands were. People, can I have your attention? This is what Pharaoh says. Pharaoh says, I'm not going to give you any more straw. You got to go out now. We've got to go out now and get ourselves straw. We've got to find it wherever we can find it. But Pharaoh said there won't be any reduction to our workload. Same quotas as before. So we scattered out throughout the land of Egypt to gather stubble for straw, to gather our own raw material. The overseers insisted to us as foremen, you got to finish your assigned work each day just as you did when the straw was provided. We knew that there was no way that this could happen. Honestly, we feared for our own lives. And when our people couldn't keep the quotas, when they couldn't go out and find the straw for the brick, when they couldn't keep our daily quotas, the overseers beat us. They beat us. And they ask us, why haven't you finished making your prescribed number of bricks yesterday or today as you did before? We asked for a meeting with Pharaoh. We'd have worked hard for Pharaoh in Egypt, building his cities. And so we as foremen thought we could go into Pharaoh and we could plead with him and we could cry out for help to him and ask him, sir, why are you treating us, your servants, this way? Finally got a meeting with him and we said to him, sir, no straw has been given to your servants. And yet they say to us, make bricks. We have no raw material. Look, Mr. Pharaoh, look, your servants are being beaten. So it's your own people who are at fault. Mr. Pharaoh, it's not us. We're trying to do the work that you've given us to do. We hoped for mercy from Pharaoh, but we couldn't believe our ears. He said, you're slackers. Slackers is what you are. This is why you're saying, let us go off and sacrifice to the Lord. Now get back to work. No straw will be given to you, but you must produce the same quantity of bricks. We saw and we knew that we were in trouble. It was an impossible situation. We knew we were in trouble when we were told you cannot reduce your daily quota of bricks. We left and we wondered why this was happening. Well, what was it that Moses said to Pharaoh anyway? Why did Moses feel compelled to say anything to Pharaoh? Why did Moses even come back to Egypt to start with? Amazingly, we walked out of the palace and guess who was standing there? Moses and Aaron. We gave them an earful. I pointed it directly at Moses and I said to him, may the Lord take note of you and let Him judge your heart and let Him judge your motives. because you have made us stink in the face of Pharaoh and his officials. You, Moses, have put a sword in their hands to kill us. Moses, our blood is on your hands. I don't know who you think you are after all of these years showing up in town after having some revival with God, and you think that you are going to lead us out of Egypt and get Pharaoh to let us go. Moses, I don't think you've had an encounter with God at all. I think you're chasing your own selfish cotton-picking ambition. With that, scene 2 ends. That had only looked like an impossible situation until Pharaoh made their lives impossible. And then he took it out on the people. The people were trapped. At the edict of the government, the military clamped down on the people and made their lives miserably impossible. Revolt was not an option. It would result in death. They were getting beaten for not carrying out impossible instructions. I'll just say to you, I can't hardly imagine their being stuck. A political pawn being beaten by the government for something for which they were certainly innocent. Caught in the political crosshairs of a ruthless dictator, racially motivated in this case. I don't know, maybe you're like me and you found yourself just a little bit more aware of international politics happening in our world today. To be sure, that's partly because Mitch Marsh, our missionary to Nicaragua, has been keeping us abreast of the situation in Nicaragua. He told me a couple Sundays ago when he was here that they are headed back. I think it's in early February. Huh? They've gone back. I missed it. They're back already. Or a similar impossible situation that is brewing in Venezuela and other Central American countries not very far away from here with those ruthless dictators. I'd like to pause for just a minute. This month, February, is Black History Month. At Milliken on Friday, we had a speaker who came to kick off the celebration of Black History Month. It was U.S. Air Force retired 4-star General, General Lloyd Fig Newton. That was his nickname, Fig Newton. He was the speaker. I hadn't heard of him, but apparently he was a board member at Milliken. General Newton was the first African-American pilot to ever fly in the infamous U.S. Air Force Thunderbirds. I took special note of that because he talked about airplanes. And he served as a pilot in Vietnam, flying hundreds of missions. The day that he was to fly out from San Diego, California to Vietnam, the first time to go active duty, was April 4th, 1968, the day that Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. And he tells the story about being there in San Diego on that day, watching the television, and he saw the riots and the protests building because Dr. King had been assassinated. And he talked about wrestling with the decision about on that day whether to get on an airplane that night at midnight and fly to Vietnam and serve his country overseas, or whether to stay here. And he posed his dilemma with the question of, was the enemy there in Vietnam, or was the enemy here in America, the enemy of racism? He had made a commitment to go. And so he honored that commitment and he went. And he said that looking back on that decision, that it was the right decision. At the end of his comments, when he was done speaking, he asked for questions, and a lady raised her hand and she asked the question, General Newton, what was it that brought you to the conclusion that going to Vietnam was the right decision? He said after he went to Vietnam and came back, he knew he had made the right decision. What was it about that decision that made you know it was the right decision? General Newton answered, because of what I saw in Vietnam. And he went on to say, because of what he has seen in other countries around the world. And he summarized it by saying this, as I've sometimes said, we can debate it, but America is the greatest country in the world. He said, I saw what was happening there, and I saw what was happening here. And I realized that in America we have something very, very special to build on. We can take what we have and make it better. I would say to you, what a sobering and exciting challenge that is. You and I, who had no choice about where to be born at, I think most of you were born in America. We had no choice about that. I was just born and boom, here I was in America. I have been blessed to be born in and live in the greatest nation ever assembled on planet Earth. Head shaking, isn't it? I offer to you that it is incumbent upon us today as Christians living in America to lead the charge in making America greater. This Thursday night, I went with Mom and Dad, my sister and brother-in-law, to a movie titled The Least of These. It was the story of a Christian missionary from Australia. His name was Graham Staines, who went to India specifically to work in leprosy camps in India. That's his life mission. In the movie, the missionary Graham Staines and his 2 young sons were brutally murdered by the local Hindus. Folks who hated Christians because they were making conversions. You saw that word show up all the time. They're making converts, they're making conversions. They were brutally murdered. In fact, it showed them in their SUV, and the folks came and basically lit the SUV on fire, and they burned in the fire. The year was 1999. That was the year I got married. That ain't very far ago on planet Earth. Today, we are the land of the free and the home of the brave. 242 imperfect years. The question for us is this: what will America look like when we are finished with it? When my generation passes America down to the next generation? What will it look like when I am finished with it? If you know me well, you know that I am an optimist. Ask Chris, he helped me yesterday at my house, working. I'm an optimist, aren't I, Chris? We can get it done. We can do this. Be careful, don't get hurt, but we can do this. But I want to offer you this sober prognosis. There must be spiritual revival in America for her to return to some path of greatness. Amen. Spiritual revival. A spiritual revival in which Yahweh is not only on the approved list of gods, Yahweh is at the top of the list, and there is nothing else on the list. God says, I'm a jealous God. I demand to be at the top. I want to be number one. Thou shalt have no other gods ahead of me. And you know where that starts, don't you? It starts in my home. It starts in my heart. It certainly begins with my time management, how I spend my time. It certainly involves my affections or my treasures. Do you remember that Jesus said, where your treasure is, that's where your heart is at also? This revival would quickly spread from my own heart in my home to my marriage and my children. I'm slower to speak rather than quicker to spout off. I'm quicker to say I'm sorry when I fail. Leading my family spiritually becomes the number one focus and objective of my life. I do that which is right, even when it's hard. And then this revival quickly spreads outside of my home to my neighborhood and my workplace. Those whom I perceive as my enemies, I make a conscious effort to reach out to them and to love them. I find some group of the least of these, and I choose to love them and to serve them. And then this revival in my soul spreads to those who are very different from me, racially, socially, demographically. I pray for them, and I love them. Finally, this tiny spark of revival in my soul spreads to somebody else. And revival breaks out. And God is worshipped and revered. And then this spiritual revival brings a cultural revival, and a moral revival, and a worldwide revival. The answer is yes. I'm an optimist. America can be preserved by the spark of revival in my heart. Remember the old campfire song, it only takes a spark to get fire going. Today in our world there are some impossible situations. Situations that look hopeless, like there is no end in sight. But America isn't there yet. It is the situation, quite frankly, in which Moses found himself, and that brings us to the third scene in Exodus chapter 5. A stunned, startled, deer in the headlights Moses. These foremen had just come out and blasted them and pointed their fingers at them and questioned their motives and told them that their blood was on Moses' hands. Were the Hebrew foremen, were they right? Was I chasing my own self-ambition? Did this vision that I had really come from God? I certainly thought it did. Did the Lord intentionally deceive me and set me up in front of Pharaoh in Egypt? God, what about the burning bush? And those miraculous signs that you gave to me? And the promise that you gave to me that I would lead your people out of Egypt? Right now I feel like an idiot. Pharaoh just humiliated me and rejected me, and now the people have turned on me. Why, God, why? Lord, why have you caused trouble for this people? God, why did you ever send me? Ever since I went into Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has caused trouble for this people. And you haven't delivered your people at all. Chapter 5 ends. We don't get any sense about the timing, but it had to have been enough time for the orders to make it down from Pharaoh to the overseers, to the foremen, to the people, and the people to scatter all over Egypt and hunt for stubble in which to make straw, and then not meet their quotas, and then the foremen get beat, and then schedule a meeting with the Pharaoh. I'm sure he put that to the top of his priority list. Days, more like weeks. Probably months. No answer. Stuck in an impossible situation. A promise from God that the people would leave Egypt, and now this, it makes no sense. It is nonsense. Our lives are like that sometimes, aren't they? Not only do the situations in our lives appear to make no sense, they often appear to be the exact opposite of what they were promised to look like. We are tempted to become disillusioned, angry, bitter, mad at God, mad at somebody else. Commonly, we would turn on and point our fingers at somebody, usually the person who spoke the promise to start with, Moses in this case. Maybe the pastor said something to you like, follow God with all your heart and He will bless your life. I believe that is a true statement. And I follow that statement to you with a prayer for you, knowing that God's timing is not my timing, and it's probably not your timing either. Silence. You may remember it was near the end of Job's long, dark journey. You remember the story of Job in the book of Job. His world came unglued and fell apart. God basically took everything away from Job. He was doing in Job's life much like what he did in Moses' life. And in chapter 38, this basically the book of Job, is Job and his three friends dialoguing back and forth and philosophizing about God and about life and about good and why do bad things happen to good people. And finally, in chapter 38, verse 1 says, "The Lord answered Job from the whirlwind." And then in verse 3 it says, God says, "Get ready to answer me, Job, like a man. When I ask you a question, you will inform me. Let's play trivia, Job. I'm asking, you're answering." Job, where were you when I established the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Just blurt it out, Job, if you know the answer. And then God goes on a spree of asking 30-some questions. I think I counted 37 question marks in that chapter. I'm not sure if I had that already on here, but I have to give Israel credit for that. He texted me the other morning, the other evening, Job chapter 38. He said that chapter was kind of for me because sometimes I find myself asking questions. God saying, where were you? You ready to answer like a man? Where were you when I established the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. If you know the answer, Job, just blurt it out. No, sir, I have no idea. I can't see it. I can't see what you're doing in my life. It doesn't make any sense. I thought I had a promise for you. That preacher at that church said that thank you for exercising the discipline of worship. I believe that God will honor that in your life and the life of your family. And I went to church for a while and it didn't happen. No, God, there's silence. I don't know what you're doing in my life. You know, sometimes we get to the other side of the journey and we are able to look back and see why it happened. Sometimes, though, we can't see why it happened. For Moses and the people of Israel, I want to quickly just offer you these three purposes for why this was happening in their lives. The first one, I think, was a test for Brother Moses. Do you remember the last time that Moses saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew? Do you remember how he responded? He killed the man. He killed the Egyptian. Now it's 40 years later and Moses is back into Egypt. He shows up, same thing, next chapter, same song, next chapter. He watches the exact same situation unfold. How would Moses respond this time to seeing the exact same situation unfold? Would he once again take matters into his own hands? Or would he simply obey God and let God do the heavy work? Had to have been a test for Moses. Second, I think it was for the Hebrews. A couple of weeks ago, I talked about being nudged by God to a new chapter. Oftentimes in our lives, it is not until the pain gets too great where we currently are that we finally have the courage to do something different. God really wanted the people of Israel to be sick and tired of where they were. Is the pain of where you are greater than the fear of what is out there? Third reason is because God's timing is God's timing. Usually it takes a whole lifetime to take the seemingly random threads of our lives and finish weaving them into that beautiful tapestry that He intends for my life. It takes Him a long time to get me where He wants me to be. So I want to close this morning with this question. What do we do in the meantime when we're facing the impossible? There is silence on the part of God. And there are no answers. And we feel like it is completely impossible. Maybe even that we are going to die. Surely the foreman felt exactly like that. Job couldn't see it. The pieces of his life didn't make sense, but Job knew the answer to that question. How do I respond? How do I live in this impossible situation? Way back earlier in Job, when he was talking to his friends, he told his friends this, and I've got it in the King James Version because I sure do love how it sounds. He told his friends, though he slay me, yet will I trust. But I will maintain my own ways of integrity before him. Though the situation doesn't get any better, though he doesn't appear to answer my prayer right now, though things don't work out, though there is silence, though I am discouraged, even if he decides to take my life, I will trust him. Why? Because God is trust. He can be trusted. Are you stuck? Does it seem impossible? The situation that you're in? Does it feel impossible? Hang on. God isn't finished sewing together the threads of a beautiful picture. Let me pray with you. Father, I thank you that I'm not there right now, but man, I sure was there. I was in that spot. I've heard the deafening noise, God, of your silence in my life. I couldn't make sense of it. God, I knew you were there. And one day you revealed yourself to me and you brought me out of that dark place. And I don't know all of these folks and where they're at right now in their lives. But I bet in a room even this size that there's some people right now who are there. God, I would ask you that you would quickly hear and answer their prayers. I would ask you that you would quickly give them the desires of their heart. And God, until you do that, I ask that you would give every one of us courage to trust you because you are trustworthy. Lord, would you speak to our hearts today? I'll be right here and I'd be glad to pray with you. I'd be glad for you to come down forward and talk to you about where you're at in your life. I'm aware that God speaks in a lot different and other and maybe better places than in the front of a church. I know that he speaks to your heart. I know that he speaks to your heart when you leave here and when you go home. I know that he's speaking to your heart when you put your head on your pillow. If you'd like to talk and share, maybe today you need to reach out and accept those red letters in your life for the very first time and trust Jesus as your personal Savior. Maybe you find yourself stuck right now and you need the courage to trust God when you can't see. This song is called Walking Through Fire. You can just stay seated. I'd be glad to meet you here if you want to get up and come down. Listen to this song called Walking Through